It's Quilty box time! We just received my Quilty box for August 2018. It's filled with fun gear picked by Sarah Watson. And she is a designer based in Brazil, so definitely go and check out her website, sarahwatsonillustration.com. So first thing we've got is our Bundles of Inspiration magazine, and this is where you can find a cool quilt pattern for this month. It's using the fabrics in this Quilty box, as well as some cool information about tie-dyeing, how you can dye some fabric. So definitely come and find this Inspiration magazine in the box. We've also got a little bit of R-fill thread. I'm always needing new spools of R-fill thread, and I love this. This is 50 weight Mako cotton, and that's the thickness that I really love for piecing. You could also use this for quilting, so that'll be really cool. We've also got this really neat fold away ruler. Now I've seen these, but I've never actually had one before. It's gonna take me a minute just to open this up. So I got it unwrapped and there we go. That is a cool 24 by 6 inch ruler. And it's really neat how it folds up like that. It folds down to just a simple 12-inch ruler. So that's gonna be really good for taking on trips and that kind of thing. And now the fabric. This is always my favorite part. I love checking out the fabrics that come in Quilty box every month. So let's see what we've got. I think this is fabric that is designed by Sarah. Let me read what it is. So this is the Terrestrial Fabric Bundle, Cloud 9 fabrics, and it's inspired by the rainforests of Brazil. So that's pretty cool. So we've got a nice kind of cheddar print, and then this blue. I love these florals. Those are really, really pretty. Nice little stripe. And this is neat. This reminds me of some Aboriginal Australian prints that I found a couple years ago, and that's really what that reminds me of. So it looks like we've got 4 fat quarters, and then we've got this nice big print panel, and it looks like we've got a whole yard. And I love this. This is just like last month where we had a nice big, large scale print. This is even bigger. And you can do all kinds of cool free motion quilting design work. You can, stitch in all of these shapes and really get some practice in. I think I want to take some of these fat quarters this month and show you how to use my new slice ruler to make a Dresden plate block. So that's what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to cut up these fat quarters and show you how to make a very large, supersized Dresden plate. So let's get started. So here is the slice ruler. This is an 18-degree wedge, which will create a 20-petal Dresden plate. And I've etched lines here on the ruler, so that way you can cut different sizes and shapes. So as it is, this is 7 inches long, but I decided that's a bit long for the amount of fabric I had to work with. I decided to cut 5.5-inch long strips and cut my Dresden plates out of that. So that's what I'm going to do to start. I've already squared up my fabric. It's ready to go. I'm going to place my ruler on top, lining up a thin line on the ruler right here with the fold line on the fabric. And then over here, I'm lining up the 5.5-inch mark with that edge. So making sure all of those things are nicely lined up together, and then press firmly and cut across. There we go. So now take this and place the ruler on top, and whatever you do, just decide to be consistent with it. So here I'm going to line up the narrow edge of the ruler with the top edge of the fabric, and I have covered the back of the ruler with some true grips, so that way it's going to be nice and grippy. So I'm placing this on so that the edge of the ruler, that narrow edge, is lined up there. Press firmly and cut. I'm always cutting with my dominant hand, and I'm cutting away from myself. There we go. Now I'm going to, in order to continue cutting with my dominant hand, I've got to rotate the fabric around and replace that ruler, again lining up that narrow edge with the edge of the cut fabric. There we go. And now I'll cut across. Now here's where it can get a little tricky, especially if you're not using the full length of the ruler. When you flip, it might be tempting to go like that and put the wide edge of the ruler against the edge of the fabric. That's not what you want to do. You want to just keep consistent. Whichever one you're doing, whether it's the wide edge of the ruler against the fabric or the narrow edge, you want to keep it consistent. So here I'm lining up again, narrow edge with the edge of the fabric, cut right across. So that's how you're going to use this ruler to cut out your wedge shapes. Just continue flipping it back and forth, lining that up nicely, and just remember whatever you start with, however you begin cutting your fabrics, just keep with that, maintain it, keep it consistent, and that way you can take your shapes and be able to piece them together and it'll create that wonderful 20 petal Dresden plate. Okay, so I have already cut out lots of shapes here. Now I want to show you how to do 2 different ends for your Dresden plate petals. The first one is super simple. All you're going to do is take that end and fold it under 1/2 inch. Or actually, I think 1/4 inch would be plenty. So there we go. Just fold that under 1/4 inch. Get a hard pressing surface and give that a nice press. And if you press that well enough, then that's going to be enough to hold. You can piece all of your Dresden plate petals together just like that. And it's going to create a basically a dodecahedron. That's a 20-sided figure, geometric figure with straight lines. So that's really neat. Another end for your Dresden plate that you can create is a pointy petal. You can fold this in half, just like this, right sides together, take it to your machine and stitch 1/4 inch from the edge. I do think it's really helpful to back stitch at the end, and when you open it out, that will create a pointy petal. So let's take it to the machine. I'll actually show you how that works. So I'm here at my machine and I always stitch through a little scrap charger first when I start piecing. So this is just a little folded in half piece of black fabric. And what this does is it just gets my machine in stitching mode, reminds me to check in on my stitch length and where my needle is placed and all that good stuff. It also reduces your bobbin thread waste. So with this particular foot, this foot I think is an automatic scant quarter. I like a regular 1/4 inch. So I dial the needle over. I just hit this button and that moves the needle over 1 click. Then I dial down and change my stitch length to 1.5 millimeters. And that produces a really nice, tight, consistent stitch. And I do that every time I start piecing. Okay, here we go. Now I'm going to take that Dresden plate shape and fold it in half, lift my presser foot and slide it underneath the foot. And I just want to make sure that I have those edges in nice alignment. There we go. Place that under and making sure that that edge of that Dresden plate just stays right in line with the edge of that patchwork foot. There we go. We'll do that one more time. Oh, and one thing, it is really nice to back stitch. Let's see if I can back stitch. Yeah, I might get a little bit of a blob right there. Usually you want to back stitch while you're still on the fabric, not after you've stitched off the edge. Let's try that again. I'm going to fold this one in half, right sides together, slide it right up next to my needle. That's one thing, always put your fabric in jail. Make sure that the very next stitch you take is going to be onto the fabric, and you do that by pushing it right up against the needle. There we go. Now I'll do it right. I'll back stitch and then come back forward. So that's how I'm going to stitch all of these Dresden plates, making them have nice pointy petals. I'll meet you back here when we're ready to start putting them together. So I grabbed some other fabric just so I could have a nice variety of petals, chain piece them all together, and then here's what they look like after you get finished piecing. So what you're going to do is take that tip and just trim that down a bit. I'm going to trim that to about 1/8 of an inch from my stitching, and that's on the side that has the folded end. And that's going to reduce the amount of bulk in the tip of your Dresden plate petal. So now I'm going to stick my thumb in there and open up that seam. The reason why I dial my stitch length down to 1.5 millimeters is so I can press all of my seam allowances open. There we go. Turn that right side out then and flatten it out. That looks good. Now to make sure that tip is nice and pointy, I'm going to use the tip of my scissors just to poke at it a little bit. Just be careful if the tips of your scissors are too sharp or you're too aggressive, then you can, of course, jab a hole right in the end of your Dresden plate. You don't want that. Okay, so to get this nice and symmetrical and flatten it out, I like to fold the entire shape in half. Make sure that that's wrong sides together now. And this gives a nice crease down the middle, so I can line up that seam line with the crease running down the middle of that Dresden plate petal. Just like that. And give it another press. There we go. So that's how you make pointy petal Dresden plates using the slice template. Go on ahead and wash and repeat that 5 times to create a total of 5 petals. And that's how you're going to piece it together in sets of 5. And I'll show you how to trim them up next so they're going to go together perfectly. So here's another Dresden plate block that I'm working on, and I did that folded edge variation. I just folded down the edge of all of these fabrics by 1/4 of an inch, and now I'm going to trim this up. This is 1/4 of my total Dresden plate, and I like to trim at this stage just to ensure that those lines are straight and square and 90 degrees. That's a 90-degree angle. If I don't trim here, it's not going to be the end of the world. As you can see, there's not a lot to trim here, but if I leave it, that could potentially make the block a little wonky. It might not set perfectly flat. So here we go. I'm just adjusting this until it looks exactly right. I'm just lining up that 45-degree line with the center of that shape. I'm also checking these sides and trying to make sure that I'm just taking off the little bit that I need. There we go. I think my seam allowance might have been off whenever I made this block. I was practicing on my treadle, so that was probably what's up with that. There we go. Now I rotate it around. So I want to keep cutting with my dominant hand. It's really tempting when your ruler is all set up so nice and perfectly to cut over and across, but I cut myself really badly actually making another Dresden plate block. So it's one of those things you really want to always cut with your dominant hand and always away from you. There we go. So that's how I would make this Dresden plate. I'd piece it in sets of 5 petals and then stop and trim it up. So that way you know that the shape is nice and square and all 4 pieces of your Dresden plate will go together perfectly. And here's some of the Dresden plates that I made with the Quilty box fabric. So this is those beautiful blues. We had that jagged print and this beautiful botanical print. And you can see just how nice those pointy petals came out. Here's looks on the back. You can see it's nicely pressed open. Those seams are pressed open, so it's going to rest nice and flat on the quilt. And this is cool because if you cut these the full size, the full length of the ruler, you're going to end up with that much of a bigger Dresden plate. This one, when the petals are cut at 5.5 inches, you're going to end up with about 11 3/4. That's how big that Dresden plate is, and that's a really nice size. Another thing that you can do is not turn any of the edges at all. That's what I did in this case. So just piece together a random arrangement here of shapes, and then I did not do anything to the edges. Instead, cut out a double layer of freezer paper into a circle, press that, and use that as a guide to turn the edge. Now I'm just going to gently pull this away, and you can see now I have a perfectly round circular Dresden plate. So there's so many different variations on Dresden plates. You can make pointy petals, you can make a perfect circle, and as you can see, this has nice angles, so you can get an angular effect as well. And you can mix and match these too. So as long as you cut your shape the same length, so this is 5.5 inches, then these shapes will work together as well. So I hope that you'll have a really good time playing with this month's Quilty box fabric, all of these beautiful fabrics, and the slice quilting ruler. You can find the slice at leahday.com/slice. Until next time, let's go quilt.